Hello, I'm Jamie Hutchinson and I'm joined today by talkSPORT's chief football correspondent Alex Crook to go through all the biggest football stories of the day, including Crookie, Nottingham Forest's search for a new manager, or is that search now over?
I think it was over a few weeks ago, to be honest, when we first got wind of the fact that Nuno Espirito Santo was on dodgy ground there. He gave that explosive press conference, if you remember, before Forest drew 1-1 at Crystal Palace. I think Evangelos Marinakis, the combustible Forest owner, shall we say, came pretty close to pulling the trigger on the back of that. Obviously, limped on, drew at Palace. They lost 3-0 at home to West Ham. And I think a couple of things happened in that game, which we'll come on to later, that really sealed Nuno's fate. But all the time, lurking in the background, as I understand it, has been Ange Postecoglou, the former Tottenham manager, sacked by Spurs, having won the Europa League last season, ending their long trophy drought. He's been keen to return to the Premier League. We know that Marinakis is a big admirer of Postecoglou, I think mainly because of the style of play that he will bring, and that was a bone of contention between Nuno Espirito Santo and Edu, who's come in as the sort of overlord of all Marinakis' clubs, wanting a more progressive playing style. Nuno, quite stubborn, I think, was wedded to not having a lot of possession, hitting on the counter-attack, which of course served Forest so well last season. So I think the inevitable outcome was always that Nuno would depart. They lost 3-0 at home to West Ham, with members of the Forest hierarchy watching from the stands at the City Ground. Douglas Luiz, who was obviously signed late in the window, he was left on the bench, even when Forest were struggling in midfield. Murray Hutchinson, signed for more than £37 million from Ipswich, was only brought on as an 89th minute substitute. And I think the Forest board felt like that was the manager really sticking two fingers up to Edu in particular. He wasn't heavily involved, Nuno, in the signing of Douglas Luiz. Wasn't necessarily against that signing, but I think he wanted to have more of a say. He also felt there were perhaps other areas of the squad that needed surgery before they brought in another midfielder. And when you're 3-0 down at home and you're refusing to bring on two of the signings that your owner has just made, then I think you know what's going to happen. And this is quite similar to Wolves as well. What happened, it turned quite sour for Nuno, you may recall, at the end of his tenure at Molineux, which was largely a success. He's still revered by the Wolves fans. But I think Nuno basically decides when he's had enough. And he knew when he made those statements in the press conference, when he refused to bring on Douglas Luiz, that his head was on the chopping block.
So at that point, is he actually hoping to get the sack, do you think? I mean, if he's deliberately making these decisions to not bring them on, and also Murray Hutchinson not being involved in the European squad, would that be part of it as well?
Yeah, I mean, that just shows how many players Forest have got. But I was told by a decent source this morning that actually that was at Nuno's insistence. He wanted basically 2 11s because he knew it would be a challenge to balance competing in the Europa League. Forest haven't been in Europe since the 1990s, and also trying to make themselves sustainable in the Premier League. So I think there's been a lot of things that have happened along the way leading to this. And I can't help but go back to the scenes on the pitch after Forest had thrown away 3 points at home to Leicester. That ultimately would cost them a place in the Champions League. You remember Evangelos Marinakis stormed onto the pitch. It looked like an angry confrontation with his manager. In the end, Forest sources claim that was because Marinakis was unhappy with a medical team. But you do wonder if that was the first step towards Nuno's exit, if ultimately he did feel like he was being undermined, and that's why it's all come to a head.
Yeah, and you mentioned they weren't happy with the style of play, which does seem a bit strange considering the success that they had last season. And they're interested in Postecoglou, as you say, that's happening. Would they not look at last season? Okay, yeah, they won Europa League, but would they not look at that, losing 22 matches out of 38 in the league? You know, they're looking at that and going, "Oh, he's the man for us." Do they think that will work?
Well, he's not been afraid to make bold decisions, has he? If you remember Marinakis, when he fired Steve Cooper to bring in Nuno, that didn't go down at all well with the Nottingham Forest fans. Steve Cooper, the man who led Forest out the doldrums back into the Premier League, looked like he might be fired quite early on in that first season in charge, survived, signed the new contract, kept them in the Premier League, and then lost his job the following season. So Marinakis will back his judgment, but I think it's a really good question, and I think it's an appointment that comes with risk attached from both sides, really, when you replace a successful manager with someone who is a trophy winner, always wins trophies in his second season, as he promised, and he delivered on that, Postecoglou, but ultimately someone who did, as you say, lose 22 Premier League games. Tottenham finished only one place above the relegation places. That's why he didn't keep his job there. I'm fascinated to see how this works out, particularly with the change in playing style. But clearly Marinakis is a fan of Postecoglou, feels like he can take the club forward. And what I think you can't do, and particularly if you're a Forest fan, you can't question his intentions and his ambitions. Yes, he's combustible. Yes, he's hot-headed. Yes, he can be difficult to work for at times. But you look at what he's managed to deliver for Forest, that Premier League return, staying in the Premier League, European football for the first time in, 30 years since the mid-1990s. I think although Forest fans will be unhappy that Nuno has gone, I don't think you're going to see mass protests because I think they're going to back their owner.
Yeah, and as you say, he's been proved right in the past. As for Postecoglou then, am I right in thinking he turned down Fenerbahce? Is that because conversations with Marinakis were ongoing and he always wanted to return to the Premier League?
Yeah, I was told that right at the start of this process when we first got whispers of the fact that maybe Nuno would leave and that Ange Postecoglou had been sounded out. It was always his intention, I think, to come back to the Premier League. He feels like he's got unfinished business here. I think he feels like he does have a point to prove after what happened at Spurs, and I think he would love to show Tottenham they were wrong to get rid of him. As you say, there's been talk of Fenerbahce. There was talk of Saudi Arabia as well soon after his departure from Spurs. That was shot down by sources close to Postecoglou when I inquired. So I think the direction of travel has always been a return to the Premier League, and maybe this has come around a bit sooner even than he expected because he's not been out of a job for very long, has he?
No, he hasn't, so we'll wait and see how he goes. Right, moving on to another story then. Manchester City and the Premier League have settled their dispute over APT rules. Are you surprised that this one has just sort of died down? They've released a joint statement and that's the end of it. Did you expect it to rumble on and Man City to carry on with their dispute?
Yeah, I did, to be honest, because obviously this is part of an ongoing row, if you like, with the Premier League. There's been tensions for a long time between Manchester City and the league itself, and I expected City to dig their heels in. It's interesting because the statement obviously was out of the blue. It was very short as well, only 3 paragraphs, the final line of which was saying neither club will now make any further comment publicly, so clearly they've agreed to keep their own counsel. I think you can make a case for both sides claiming victory in this one, the Premier League, because their amended associated party transaction rules will now be brought into play. But for City, I think they feel like they've recorded a small win because directors' loans will be taken into account. That could have direct impact on the likes of Arsenal, one of their rivals for Premier League titles and for Champions League football. And also it should now enable them to get a big money sponsorship deal with Etihad Airlines over the line, which maybe the Premier League could have blocked and now they won't. I think the bigger picture is this is the sort of first olive branch, the first sign of a truce between City and the Premier League ahead of those 115 plus charges for financial breaches reaching a conclusion. And I would imagine that conclusion not too far away now.
So you think that'll have an impact on it, or Man City are almost showing willing that they're able to finish a dispute and not carry it on in the hope that that will stand them in good stead when it comes to these further charges?
I think so, and I think they're trying to improve relations between them and the Premier League and the rest of the teams in the division before we do get a verdict about these charges. I think the frustrating point for me, and I pressed Richard Masters on it at the Premier League launch in Liverpool before the season started, is it all feels a bit clandestine. Even that statement, we're not going to make any further public comment. We didn't really get any details about the settlement, the agreement the two parties had come to. And it's the same with these financial breaches as well. All of the hearings have taken place behind closed doors. You press the Premier League for a date as to when it might be resolved, and they can't even give you that. And I think that's a frustration for a lot of fans and probably for Manchester City supporters as well, because it almost looks like the two parties have something to hide.
Yeah, and you mentioned the negative impact it might have on Arsenal, the fact that director loans are now involved. Can you just explain that a little bit further? What would be the implications of that, and how would that impact City as well?
Well, I think what Manchester City were keen to enforce was that where owners of clubs lend their clubs money, they were treated the same as a sponsorship deal, because this is all about fair market value. So what the Premier League are trying to stop clubs doing, City for example, is overinflating the sponsorship from Etihad Airlines, knowing of course that they're part of the same ownership as the football club. And City's argument is, well, if you're going to do that, you have to treat loans in the same way. Interest has to be repaid, and it looks like they've got their way on that front. So teams, as I say, like Arsenal, Liverpool, Brighton down the south coast, who've been bankrolled by Tony Bloom, might just have to be a little bit more careful now about where their funding is coming from.
Right, okay, and on to Manchester United and Andre Onana. He's finally on his way out of Old Trafford, isn't he?
He is. The Turkish transfer window still has a few more days to run. He's due to undergo a medical in the next 48 hours or so at Trabzonspor. And the most incredible element about this story is that he's actually managed to get himself a pay rise. He asked for an improved contract after Manchester United missed out on a place in the Champions League. It's standard practice that if that happens, all the players have to take a wage cut of up to 25%. Clearly, he wasn't happy about that, and he's going to Trabzonspor, and with bonuses, he's going to be earning more than he would if he stayed at Manchester United. A couple of other aspects of this story. One, I'm told that West Ham United were considering a loan move before David Sullivan watched Onana play against Grimsby in the League Cup. He made a couple of massive errors, you'll recall, in that game, and they've decided to move elsewhere. I think Lucas Fabianski, at the age of 40, could well be on his way back to London Stadium. And the second element is that I think Onana was told by United that if he stayed around, with the signings of Seny Lemons and with Altay Bayındır starting the season as number one in the Premier League, there was every chance that Onana would find himself as third choice goalkeeper, and clearly he didn't want to do that. So that's why this move has come around. I think you've got to say, when you look at Erik ten Hag's signings, Højlund obviously has gone out on loan to Napoli. They spent big money on him. Onana now is off to Trabzonspor. You've got other players like Anthony who've come in on inflated fees. United have had to take a big loss to send him to Real Betis. Giving Erik ten Hag the keys to the kingdom, letting him dictate the transfer policy, has proved a costly mistake for Manchester United.
Yeah, but being able to get rid of Onana and some of the other players who were high up on the wage bill at United, are there positives from a United perspective being able to get rid of these players? A sort of ruthlessness that Amorim is able to get rid of players when he wants to.
Yes, I think that ruthlessness has been important, and the squad clearly needed a big clear out. But the issue is not many of the signings have gone out permanently. I think Højlund will go permanently, assuming that Napoli qualify for the Champions League, as they should. But Marcus Rashford is only on loan. Jadon Sancho at Aston Villa, only on loan. This is only a loan deal for Onana in Turkey as well. And I think ultimately he would probably have to take a pay cut in order to make that move permanent. So the problem that United have had for a number of years now, compared to, say, Arsenal, Liverpool and certainly Manchester City, they're not very good at selling players. The fact they had to take a £60 million hit on Anthony is really bad in terms of PSR, and a really bad look on the hierarchy in many ways as well, though not necessarily this hierarchy, because of course Anthony was a player that was signed before Sir Jim Ratcliffe and Omar Barada and Jason Wilcox took up their posts.
And let's finish with Tottenham Hotspur. You revealed last month that Fabio Paratici was coming back as managing director. What's the latest on that? Has that changed now since the departure of Daniel Levy?
Yeah, I think this one is in limbo. This was an appointment very much that was driven by Levy. Paratici was part of the recruitment team before at Spurs, had to step down because he was banned by FIFA for 30 months for false accounting at his former club Juventus. That ban ultimately was reduced and he came back to Tottenham in a sort of unofficial advisory role, but had a big say in their transfer dealings. And it was our understanding at talkSPORT that once the window closed, he would come back in a permanent capacity, probably to start work officially in early October. Not guaranteed that happens now. And I think what we know about Tottenham and Daniel Levy's departure, the fact that he had lined up Paratici to come in, tells us that actually it was a bolt from the blue. It was a move, as we reported last week, driven by ENIC and the Lewis family to try and change the direction of travel at the top of the club. And I think we can certainly say now that Paratici's return is in doubt, if not highly unlikely now at this moment in time, without Daniel Levy at the helm.
And that was because their relationship was so good, and you think with Levy gone, Spurs wouldn't want to go down that route, or would it be Paratici who's not interested now?
Well, probably a combination of the two, but I think certainly the Lewis family want a clean break from Daniel Levy. You see that with the appointments that have come in. They've got a new non-executive chairman recruited from ENIC. They've got a new chief executive there. I think is going to have a massive say on how the club is run. So it wouldn't surprise me if they just try and sweep away all connections to Daniel Levy. He already lost his right-hand lady midway through last season. So I think that's why it's difficult now to see this Paratici appointment going ahead.
Okay, we'll see what happens with that one. Thanks, Crookie. Speak to you soon.
No worries.